I'm going to walk you through a typical real estate transaction as the buyer's agent. Keep in mind throughout this whole transaction, us as realtors kind of act as the glue of the transaction. We don't really have too many things that we have to do, but just put all the parties together and make it all one brain. I'm Julian Chavez, I'm 23 years old. I own my own brokerage in Miami, Florida called iBuySFL, and I'm gonna walk you through a real estate transaction. Sometimes, honestly, it feels like the real estate agents in the transaction want to get the deal done more than anyone else, but that's okay because we're getting paid. If they're a financing client, make sure that they have a pre-approval letter from a trusted lender, not one of these bullshit sources online that they get a pre-approval letter without running credit or checking tax returns. Also, as an agent, it's always great to develop relationships with mortgage loan originators because when they see your file on the top of their desk, they're typically gonna work on it first before some random person that sends them a deal. So the second step in this process is sending your clients listings and scheduling showings. I have a whole separate video talking about how to schedule showings as a real estate agent if you wanna check that out. So the client found the house that he likes. It's time to make an offer. At this point in the transaction, timing is crucial. You wanna get that offer out as soon as possible, so hurry the up. Another important factor in this is developing a relationship with the listing agent. That's really important right now because we're in such a seller's market that you really want the listing agent to take your offer over everyone else's offer. So I would give her a call or give him a call and try to make a relationship with them based on something you guys could find in common. When you make this offer, be sure to send it with a pre-approval letter or a proof of funds letter. Keep in mind when you're writing this offer and you're negotiating the transaction that you don't work for the buyer here, you don't work for the seller here, you're working for the transaction and to get the deal done. In another video, I'll be walking agents through how to actually fill out a Florida bar real estate sales contract. After the offer is signed by the buyer and the seller, you now have an executed contract. I also recommend agents to develop a significant dates timeline and email that along with the executed documents to all parties involved in the transaction. So that would be the title company and the mortgage company, just to keep everyone on board. In Florida, typically 3 days after the contract is signed, the buyer has to put up their earnest money deposit. That's to guarantee the seller that the buyer is actually going to close on the transaction. In Florida, it's typical to put $5,000 all the way up to 10% of the purchase price of the transaction into escrow. That money goes directly deposited with the title company. In Florida, I recommend TrustStar Title as my trusted title company for all my real estate transactions. So now we're on to step 6 of the real estate transaction, and that is the inspection period. The inspection period is established on the real estate sales contract. That could be a time period between 1 day all the way up to 15 days. During that time period, the buyer hires an inspector to go out to the property and inspect it and make sure it's all good. As a real estate agent, I recommending your client an inspector to go out and check out the property. Also during this period, it gives the right to the buyer to back out for any reason whatsoever. So the next step in a real estate transaction is if there's a homeowners association or condo association, make sure that the buyer applies to the association on time, help them fill out their application. If it's a condo, make sure that the seller has requested the condo docs to present to your buyer to make sure that the condo has reserves and that everything is well with no litigation or nothing against the condo. The 8th step of the real estate transaction is getting a loan commitment from the lender. This shows whether or not the lender is going to provide financing for the deal or not. This is typically 30 days after the effective date. The effective date is the day that the contract was signed by all parties. After this 30 days is over, the buyer's deposit has gone hard, which means if they don't close on the deal, they're gonna lose their deposit. So you don't want that to happen. So what I do on the 30 days is I call the lender, I'm like, hey, provide me a loan approval. If not, we're gonna have to get an extension on the loan approval date. The 9th step of the real estate transaction is the appraisal. The appraisal is a very important factor. This means the bank is sending someone out to the property to determine the value of it. This makes or breaks a lot of deals. If there is an appraisal contingency on the contract, that means that you have up to 10 days before closing to figure out what the appraisal has came back at. If there is no appraisal contingency, that means that they have to follow the loan contingency date, which is typically the 30 days that I talked about earlier. If the appraisal comes back low, you are able to negotiate with the seller to try to figure out a middle price in between. And it also gives the buyer the ability to walk out of the deal if you have an appraisal contingency on it, or it falls within the initial 30 days of the loan commitment period. So this is the 10th step in the real estate transaction and the most important step in any real estate transaction, which is the closing date, which means that the buyer is finally closing on their property. And we're getting paid, which is the most important part. This closing typically happens 30 to 45 days after the initial signing of the contract. As an experienced real estate broker, I do recommend getting your client a gift. They'll always remember you by it, and get them something good. Don't get them something cheap. I've gotten my clients bottles of Dom Perignon and other expensive scotches, tequilas, anything depending on whatever they like. Typically throughout the transaction, you'll be talking about alcohol sometimes because people get really stressed during these transactions. So that's it. I've walked you through a real estate transaction. If you found this content useful, please subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, please DM me on Instagram, JulianChavez_RE, and I will continue posting videos for real estate agents, real estate investors, and anyone else interested in real estate.